So Kenya has improved in the fight against corruption. Kenya is now listed 143 out of 180 in the 2017 Corruption Index, down 2 places from 145 in 2016. Rwanda is the least corrupt country in East Africa.
We haven't had breakfast, have we? Good morning. Thank you very much for honoring our invitation to be with us this morning as we launch the Corruption Perception Index 2017. I think my colleagues who have been here, Caro and Elizabeth, have very well given you the history of the CPI. And I think it is one of those products within the TI movement, our flagship product, that basically tries to help us understand where we are or where different countries are in the fight against corruption. And I will very quickly go into the presentation, and then at the end of it, I'll be able to respond to some questions that you might have. But just a quick recap, what's the CPI? The CPI is the Corruption Perception Index. It scores and ranks countries and territories based on how corrupt a country's public sector is perceived to be. It is a composite index, which means that it's a combination of surveys and assessment of corruption collected by a variety of reputable institutions. It's an aggregate index. It is limited in scope as it captures perceptions of the extent of corruption in the public sector from the perspective of business people and country experts. So it differs from other products that we have, like the East African Bribery Index, because it does not go to the ground to collect primary data. Neither does it collect actual incidences of corruption. It is an indicator of perceptions of public sector corruption, that is administrative as well as political corruption. It is not a verdict on the levels of corruption of entire nations or societies, or of their policies or the activities of their private sector. Having said that, I can now quickly go to the scores for this year. And just to reiterate for you that the scores that we have here range from 0 to 100, where 0 is considered highly corrupt, and 100 is very clean. And it is color-coded.
All right, some interesting numbers there. And we just want to bring in my colleague, Mark Namaswa, who was at that event. Mark, good morning. So now we're number 143 out of 180 with regard to, corruption index here in the country. Tell us more about these numbers.
Now, Betty, if we look at our position this year, seemingly we have improved from position 145 to 143, but we are still within the same range. For instance, if we look at the percentage out of 100 that we scored in 2017, we are at 28%. Compared to 26% in 2016, which means we are still below average. Now, if you compare our numbers with those ones of Rwanda, we have some great catching up to do. For instance, Rwanda, while it is world number 48, which means only 47 countries ahead of it are cleaner perceivably when you look at the corruption index. Rwanda scored 55% out of 100, yet we are having 28% out of 100. And we are also within the same region. So it tells you that we still have a lot of catching up to do. But again, looking at the global index, when you look at the countries that have been jostling for the top position as the least corrupt countries in the world, mostly the Nordic countries, countries that are up there, such as Norway, are still in the lead. For instance, this year we have New Zealand has become the first, the country number 1 at position 1, then Denmark, then Finland, Norway, and Switzerland have tied. And then you also have Singapore, one of the Chinese tigers that is coming up. Now, looking at their numbers, our 28% compared to the numbers posted by New Zealand at 89%, Denmark 88%, Finland, Norway, and Switzerland at 85%. It means we still have a lot of catching up to do. But again, looking at Kenya's geopolitical and economic dominance in the past few years has been really challenged by countries such as Ethiopia. For instance, starting from 2016, Ethiopia surpassed Kenya as the biggest economy in Eastern Africa. And looking at Rwanda also is also coming up. But again, we have also had reports starting from about 3 years ago that our about a third of our total budget goes to corruption, is lost to corruption, which means if we have a budget of, say, 2.1 trillion Kenya shillings, it means we are losing about 700 billion yearly to corruption. So it means we still have great catching up to do. Our being at 28%, an improvement from 26% in 2016, and also our position at 143 from 145 is a very, very slight coincidental improvement. Betty.
Okay, it's interesting that you say that. So now like you've mentioned, we've slightly improved. And of course, you've mentioned that Rwanda is one of the leading countries to having low rates of corruption. What is it that they're doing right?
I have asked the CEO of Transparency International, Samuel Kimeu, to tell us really what happens. Why is it that we have Ethiopia and why is it that we have Rwanda seemingly doing better than us? The answer he has given is that when we look at Rwanda, it has what we might put in quotes strongman government. When we look at Ethiopia, it also has that same trait. And when you look at Rwanda, at the Kenyan perspective, we are perceived to have a greater democratic space and more freedoms. But again, compared to Ethiopia and Rwanda, the people who engage in corruption have someone to fear. When they look up at the government, they know something might happen to them. And from the Rwandan perspective, Paul Kagame, of course, when people intend or try to engage in corruption, they know that something might happen, so they have reason to fear. But when we look at the Kenyan perspective, we have a lot of things going on. We have counties, we have what we call cartels. We have a lot of activity happening in Kenya. So being able to track down and trace some of these lost assets due to corruption and the fear of the Kenyan population or leadership to desist from engagement in corruption is minimal compared to the Rwandan perspective. In fact, when we analyze, sometimes when Rwandans and Ugandans are having fights over Twitter, you will see Ugandans referring to Rwandans as people living in a dormitory and their president is the dormitory captain. So it's very easy to monitor activities that happen in Rwanda. So that might account for why Rwanda has been able to tame its corruption and also been able to make strides much more effectively compared to the Kenyan perspective, where things happen and you might not really be able to pinpoint certain people and hold them accountable for their actions concerning corruption. Betty.
All right. A strong man government you mentioned, Mark. Thank you for that. All right. So, of course, Mark is just updating us on that corruption index that was released by Transparency International. Kenya being ranked 143 out of 180. And back in 2016, we were 145. So we have really slightly improved. But like my colleague there has said, still we're losing too much money to corruption here in the country. All right.